right, diving in today. Into a watch that's making a splash, so to speak, the Vulcain Cricket Nautical Dive Watch. It's back, and we're going deep on this one.
It's not just a timepiece, it's, well, yeah, a piece of history with a built-in decompression table, an underwater alarm. Pretty unique.
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard about it, I was like, a decompression table on a watch. So maybe you can start us off. Where did this watch even come from?
Okay, so picture the late 1950s. Diving's getting popular, right? Not just pros, but more people are going underwater. And with that comes a need for, well, underwater alarms. Enter Vulcain. They were already famous for their cricket movement, which was all about alarm watches. So they saw this opportunity like, hey, let's make a dive watch that can actually sound an alarm underwater.
Now, an underwater alarm. I never really thought about that. Does sound even like travel well underwater.
Surprisingly, yeah. Actually, even better than in air. So having a way to hear a signal, it was a big deal for divers back then. You know, it could be a safety thing, making sure you didn't stay down too long.
Right. So it's like a safety feature almost.
Yeah.
To help you avoid, those issues with staying down too long.
Yeah.
But how do they actually make a watch that could both sound an alarm and, survive underwater?
That's where the Cricket Nautical gets really interesting. They came up with something called get this, a triple case back.
Triple case back? Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah. Think of it this way. You ever tap a tuning fork on a table?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it gets louder.
Exactly. It amplifies that sound. So the triple case back is kind of like that table, creates a resonance chamber that, boom, makes the alarm louder underwater, but also keeps it watertight.
Clever. Like a built-in megaphone. But, okay, I gotta admit, a decompression table on a watch face. It sounds a bit, I don't know, complicated for actual use underwater, maybe?
You know, looking back now, with all our fancy dive computers, yeah, maybe. But back then, this was cutting-edge stuff. Think about it. You're underwater, no digital displays or anything. Having this mechanical tool to calculate safe ascent times, huge deal.
So it wasn't just a cool feature. It was, essential back then.
Exactly. It was a tool, a vital one, for divers in that era. But then the question becomes, how do you fit all that functionality onto a watch dial? And that's where the design gets even more interesting.
The design. Lay it on me.
Okay, so picture this. The dial has two rotating plates. Think layers. One of them acts like a rotating bezel so you can track your dive time. The other, well, has the decompression table right there.
Wait, so you have to line them up or something?
Yeah, you align them based on your dive depth, how long you're down there, and the alarm hand. It's like a pointer showing you those all-important decompression stops.
Okay, I'm trying to picture it in my head, but it still seems pretty, complex to use underwater.
It takes some practice, for sure. But the idea was you plan your dive on the surface, get everything set up before you even go down. Imagine a diver back in the 60s, right? Meticulously lining up those scales, trusting this mechanical marvel to guide their ascent. Pretty cool, huh?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's like this blend of, I don't know, human ingenuity and just the raw challenge of diving back then. It's almost like a symbol of that whole era of exploration.
Absolutely. And this watch wasn't just some concept, it was actually used in real dives. There's this guy, Hans Keller, a Swiss diving pioneer. Back in '66, he used a Cricket Nautical during a record-breaking dive, almost 250 meters deep.
Whoa, that's got to be, over 800 feet? With the technology they had back then, that's
Yeah, get this. The dive was witnessed by Jacques Cousteau himself. Talk about an endorsement.
Okay, this watch just keeps getting cooler. But let's fast forward a bit, right, to today. What's different about the re-released version?
Well, Vulcain, they're known for these revivals, and they do them right. They bring back these iconic watches, keep the original movements and designs, but, with modern materials, modern techniques.
So it's like best of both worlds. Vintage charm, but with, modern reliability.
You got it. So, for example, the case size. Still a hefty 42.2 millimeters. It's gonna make a statement on your wrist, that's for sure.
I bet. I mean, you can't really hide a watch like that.
Nope. And it's thick, too, over 17 millimeters. That's mainly because of that complex movement we talked about, and, of course, the resonance chamber.
Right. So they kept that vintage look, but did they use any, updated materials?
Oh, yeah. For one, the crystal is now sapphire, much tougher than the acrylic they used back in the day, but they kept that ultradome shape, so it still has that vintage vibe.
Oh, nice. It's those little details that, really make a difference. They could have flattened it out.
Exactly. And, of course, gotta have the water resistance right. For a dive watch, the re-edition, 300 meters, more than enough for, well, pretty much any recreational diving.
So it's ready for adventure, just like the original. But we got to talk about the dial. That's got to be one of the most striking things about this watch.
Oh, the dial. That's where it gets fun. There are two versions, both with a black base, but you can choose different lume options, and they have, different colored minute tracks, just a touch of personalization. But the really cool part, that central section.
The decompression table.
You got it. It's actually made up of two rotating parts. There's a fixed lower plate that's got all the scales on it, and then a rotating upper plate that you control with the crown. And it's the interplay between those two plates, along with the alarm hand, that makes the decompression table work.
All right, so break it down for me. How does it actually work in practice?
Okay, so let's say you're planning a dive, right? 30 meters for 45 minutes. First, you set the alarm for 45 minutes. That's going to position that red alarm hand at the right spot on the dial. Then you rotate the upper dial so that the little arrow says 0 next to it lines up with the minute hand. That's your starting point.
So it's like you're pre-programming your dive plan onto the watch face.
Exactly. Then you use those white scales on the dial, along with the decompression table itself, to figure out how much decompression time you need.
So it's like a mini dive computer, but like all mechanical.
Yeah, pretty amazing, right? And that's what makes the Cricket Nautical so fascinating. It's a reminder of a time when, well, mechanical innovation was really pushing the limits.
I mean, it really is mind-blowing that like all that complexity can fit on your wrist. But wouldn't it be, I don't know, easier to just use a modern dive computer these days? I mean,
Yeah,
technology's come a long way since the 60s, right?
Oh, absolutely. Dive computers, they're way more precise. They take into account things like water temperature, even your own physiology. Makes diving safer, no doubt. But that decompression table on the Cricket Nautical, it's more than just a tool. It's a piece of history,
Mhm.
A reminder of how clever those early divers were.
It's like you're carrying a bit of that adventurous spirit with you, not just telling the time, but like telling a story. And speaking of stories, let's talk about the heart of this watch, the movement. Is it as impressive as everything else we've been discussing?
Oh, the movement. Yeah, it's a story in itself. The re-edition uses the hand-wound caliber V10, which is based on that original 1947 cricket movement.
Ah, the cricket movement.
Yeah.
That's what Vulcain is known for, right?
Yeah.
That dual mainspring system.
Bingo. Having two mainsprings, it was a game changer for alarm watches. One powers the timekeeping, the other's dedicated to the alarm. So the alarm doesn't, mess with the watch's accuracy.
It's like having two engines in a car, one for cruising, one for when you need that extra boost. That must have been pretty revolutionary back then.
It was a big deal. And the Caliber V10 and the new Cricket Nautical, it keeps that tradition alive, really shows how dedicated Vulcain is to their watchmaking heritage.
Sounds like they really wanted to stay true to the original. But they didn't just, like, copy and paste it.
Right.
There must be some modern upgrades in the movement as well.
Oh, for sure. It's based on the original design, but the Caliber V10 uses, modern techniques and materials. For example, there's this thing called the Exactomatic system. It's patented. It basically makes sure the watch keeps accurate time no matter what you're doing.
Exactomatic. Sounds pretty high-tech. How does that work?
Imagine, like, tiny shock absorbers for the balance wheel. That's the heart of the timekeeping, right? The Exactomatic system minimizes friction and variations, keeps the watch running smoothly.
That's pretty cool. So not just about looks, it's about performance too. Speaking of performance, how long does this thing, this mechanical marvel, how long does it tick before you got to wind it up again?
Well, the Caliber V10 boasts a 42-hour power reserve when fully wound. So more than enough for a weekend of, adventures, whether you're diving or just enjoying life topside.
So to sum it all up, this Cricket Nautical, it's not just a watch. It's like a piece of diving history, a feat of engineering, and a conversation starter all in one.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a reminder that sometimes the coolest stories, they're told by the things we wear on our wrists.
And it makes you wonder, with all the, technological advancements we have now, is there still a place for these vintage-inspired watches?
That's a great question. I think there's a certain charm to them, a romanticism, They connect us to a time when exploration and innovation went hand in hand.
Yeah. Like choosing to write a letter by hand instead of shooting off an email. It's a choice that shows you appreciate, craftsmanship, history.
Exactly. And the Cricket Nautical is a perfect example of that. It's a watch that tells a story, sparks conversations, reminds us of that human spirit of adventure.
Well said. So for our listeners out there who are probably just as, fascinated by this watch as we are, where can they go to learn more?
Well, the internet, it's a goldmine, right? Just search Vulcan Cricket Nautical. You'll find articles, reviews, even videos. You can even dig up old ads, diving manuals if you look hard enough.
Oh, I love that. Finding an old advertisement, imagining what it was like to see this watch for the first time back then.
And don't forget about online forums, those watch communities. You can connect with other enthusiasts, share your passion, maybe even find someone who owns a cricket nautical and get the first-hand scoop.
Like a secret society of watch lovers, all brought together by their love for these incredible timepieces. Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, one final question for our listeners. Would you rely on this vintage decompression table in a real dive today?
Ooh, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, the table, it's based on, solid decompression principles. It worked for divers back then, but diving tech, it's come a long way.
Dive computers are, I mean, they're so much more advanced now. They factor in so much more. It just makes diving safer overall.
For sure. So while the Cricket Nautical's decompression table, it's a cool historical feature, a nod to those resourceful early divers, it's probably best left as, a backup or a conversation starter, not your main tool for diving today.
It's a reminder that progress is a good thing, especially when it comes to safety. But that doesn't, take away from the allure of this watch.
Hmm.
It's still an amazing piece of history, something that makes you curious, makes you want to explore both the world of watchmaking and, well, the world underwater.
You said it. And the Cricket Nautical story, it opens up a whole world of exploration beyond just watches. You can dive into the history of diving itself, the science behind decompression, the stories of those pioneers who pushed the limits.
It's like a rabbit hole of fascinating knowledge